here's Ed Bernstein.
Hi, welcome to our show. Pleased to have Marianne Williamson. You know, I have been reading your books and following your career for a lot of years.
Thank
a lot
you.
of years. I mean, you've written some incredible books, A Course in Miracles.
Well, I didn't write The Course in Miracles, but I read about A Course in Miracles.
You teach a class
Yes,
in A Course in Miracles. You always seem to be at the cutting edge of where culture may be going or should be going next. And you're currently in Las Vegas because you're promoting a tour. Is that the right word for this?
Yeah, I'm doing a tour of the country.
Right, the Love America.
The Love America tour.
Love America tour. Now, is this different than Let's Make America Great again?
Well, it's a different concept of what makes America great. I think love is what makes us great. So I think that many people in the United States, not just myself, long for a different conversation than the one that dominates our current public sphere. There's something so toxic, so fearful, so dark, so bigoted, so hateful, that has found a political voice and formed a political force field in the United States. We all know this. And we must create the alternative. We can't just fight that. We have to create a real substitute, and that's to bring back a conversation that includes love and justice and fairness and principle and ethics and goodness and morality, and make that a public conversation and turn that into a political force field.
How did we get here, Marianne? I mean, it seems to me that when people think lovingly of the past and they go back to the 50s and in the United States, it's kind of like everybody lived in neighborhoods, you knew your neighbor, people, you know, worked with each other. Now everything is so spread out around the world via the internet and things like that. And there's all this xenophobia that's prevalent everywhere around the world. Is that because you don't know your neighbor anymore?
Well, obviously it's a multidimensional problem. There's not one particular issue that is the problem, and there's not one particular issue that's the medicine. First of all, we don't want to forget that back in those days of the kind of romanticized ideal, there was also much more deeply seated racism and so forth. Many of the problems that we have now were alive and well then, but in particular pockets and perhaps not given as much public exposure. So we want to remember that as well. But there was a time where it did seem, and I don't think it just seemed, where it was true, that there was more of a sense of human connectivity being that which mattered most. We have created, once again, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's been policy after policy, attitudinal shift, cultural shift after cultural shift. It has to do with technology, but more than anything, it has to do with an economic perspective in which money became the bottom line in a way that it doesn't in a well-lived life. We love our children. Of course we have to make a living. Of course economics matters. But we don't put money before the health and well-being of our children. We don't put money before the health and well-being of our homes. And yet as a society, we have allowed money to become a corrupting influence in a way that has turned brotherly love into just this peripheralized notion that no longer is the bottom line that it needs to be in any ethical life and any ethical society. Now, because of that, however, because it all became money, 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 and then you add to that, as you well know, the undue influence of money on our politics, that actually did not, this focus on money did not create a more abundant society, except for a very few people. So when you have 1% of the population controlling as much wealth as the bottom 90%, what do you have? You have chronic economic despair on the part of millions and millions of people, which has just created this stress and this anxiety and this tension. And so you certainly don't say to people who are living in chronic economic despair, don't think about the money, but you realize that the fact as a society we have made money more important than love is what has in fact made money shrink for the majority of people.
I don't think anybody would argue that point. But then the challenge becomes, well, how do you change it? I mean, what you're saying sounds great, a little bit esoteric in that regard, but what fundamental things can we effectuate in the United States to make some of those changes?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's esoteric at all to say that we are on this earth to love each other. And love is practical. Love is as love does. Now, Martin Luther King said we need a quantitative change in our circumstances and a qualitative change in our souls. So we need both. On one hand, we need to change in terms of our own individual relationships and our own, we need to get off the phone sometimes and talk to the person who are next to us. We need to be kinder in line. I mean, some of these things just have to do with personal relationships, but also in terms of our public policies. You know, traditionally in the United States, the conservative side of the political spectrum focused on issues of private morality, but the liberal or progressive side of our political spectrum used to concentrate on issues of public morality. And we need to do that again. Income inequality is a public issue. You know, war and peace is a public issue. Economic and criminal is a moral issue. Economic and criminal justice, these are moral issues. So when you say, what do you do? What you do, look at something like universal health care. Universal health care is about reducing the stress that so many millions of Americans go through. People can't thrive, people can't soar, people can't spread their wings when they're worried all the time. And to love that person, love means you do what you can, not just for yourself, but for your brothers on this planet, for other people on this planet, to create a situation that's not so hard for people. That's why we should have universal health care. That's why we should have paid maternity and paternity leave. That's why we should have more economic justice. That's why we should have criminal justice, because it's ethical. These are moral issues. So when you say it's esoteric, I don't think that's esoteric at all. I think that many practical issues need to be given a more expanded moral context so that people understand why they matter so much.
Right, and as you're having this conversation in Washington, they're deciding whether or not to leave 9 million children uninsured under the CHIP bill. Correct. Right, take it out of the budget for 9 million children who cannot afford health care. Right. So
the CHIP program.
Right. So I mean, so you have a big constituency in Washington that think that their voters in their districts and in their states don't want to provide insurance for children.
Well, they don't. The problem is not that people with that level of lack of care for their fellow human being exist. I mean, this is a country, it's a free country, we don't all agree. The problem isn't that those people exist. The problem is that those people are in power. And the fact that they have so much power is not, you know, it's a free society. Those people ran for office and those people in many cases simply won. The problem is that too many people of conscience have not been active politically. Too many people of conscience have not asserted these issues of conscience in the political. I would say they care about human beings, but our private expressions need to, and I think do, by the way, after what's happened in this country in the last year, realize that you cannot leave politics out of your formulation for healing the world. We, you know, American citizens, I think, are waking up to the fact that, as the French say, if you don't do politics, politics do you. A passive citizenry becomes a powerless citizenry. So we have to take our democracy back by once again recognizing that our being citizens involved on local levels, on state levels, and on federal levels has to be simply part of life as we live it. Not just every 2 years when you vote, not just every 4 years when you vote, when you have corporate lobbyists who are visiting your congresspeople and your senators every single day. Right. You can't express yourself just every 2 or 4 years. Yeah. This is what we're realizing. I don't think American democracy is dead yet. It's on life support, though, and this is an urgent moment. And listen, this is 2018. We have 10 months to go, right, or 11 months to go before the midterm elections, and I think we're going to wake up and show this country, this world, who we are.
Now, I should acknowledge that you do walk the talk, because, in fact, you did a number of years ago run for Congress in California, right? What was that experience like? I mean, you obviously went in there, and I can talk for myself. I did. I was a little bit naive, never having been in politics before, but you were there. I mean, to make changes, to talk about the type of things you just spoke about love.
Right.
And here you're doing it in Southern California, and it's not resonating?
Oh, I think it resonated. You and I were talking earlier. You said that your running for office was the best and the worst experience of your life. In many ways, that was my experience too. The most exhilarating thing I've ever done and the most brutal thing I've ever done. I thought that it was legitimate for me to run for office because I felt that I could hit the ground running on day one because of my knowledge and understanding of the issues. What I vastly underestimated was the significance of the fact that I didn't know anything about running a political campaign.
Right.
That was the issue I didn't understand well enough, and tried to farm that out to the kind of political
Washington insiders that do this for a living.
Right.
And you're back to square one in what you achieve.
But Dennis Kucinich said to me that and I hope that you feel this way as well, that every campaign has a win on some level. I think that a public conversation affects the ethers. Look at someone like Bernie Sanders. Look at something like single payer. Look at something like universal health care. There's nothing like a political campaign in terms of a megaphone. And so now this country has a mainstream conversation about universal health care, about single payer, that I don't think it would be having had Bernie Sanders not run. So did he win? No. But did the country win because he ran? Yes.
Yes, but now we're talking about walls instead of single payers.
Yes, we are. But we must, once again, you can't just destroy what you don't want. You have to create what you do want. We can't just fight what we don't want. We have to have the conversation about what we do want. And that, I think, is equally important. And that's why I call it the Love America Tour, not just the Let's Not Hate America Tour.
You've written and speak about spiritual matters all the time. What is your philosophy about faith right now? It seems to me that we have ebbs and flows on religion, and all the religions would acknowledge that maybe faith in each of the major religions is not as great as today as it was a number of years ago in the United States. Are people losing faith? And let's talk about faith first, and I want to ask you about what you think happens after you die.
I think that actually we're living in a period of spiritual emergence at this time. The fact that it is not always centered in your institutional religious organizations. Your religious institutions are losing, and this is probably good for them, because they're going to have to figure out maybe we should return to some of our own spiritual basics. But I think a lot of people who left those religious institutional entities then found over the last few years they had sort of thrown away the baby with the bathwater. So now a lot of people are living profoundly faith-based existences, but do not feel that they need to center that faith experience within the context of a organized religious institution. Faith in God is faith in love, that we love one another. That is the essence of all faith traditions. It's how we live. It's how we live with each other, whether we love each other, whether in fact we are brothers on this earth. That, I think, people are actually coming back to in droves. And I think that everything that we're talking about politically has to do with people thinking, well, wait a minute, if this is true for me, how I'm supposed to live as an individual, then isn't this also true how we are supposed to live collectively? And in the time that we have left, you mentioned this idea of what happens, quote unquote, after we die. Right. One of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, and he talks about, he says, the failure to deal with the subject of death robs the second half of life of its meaning. Once you reach a certain age, whether you're thinking about your own mortality or you experience the things that are more probable as we age, the loss of loved ones, friends, etc., we begin to think about not just what happens after we die, but what is possible in the time that we have left. And I think that whether it's coming from a Judeo-Christian perspective or from a Buddhist perspective, how we feel at the end of our lives, how did I do, is the essence of a faith-based question. Will I feel on the day I die, I did everything I did to kick ass for love? That's what I believe the call of faith is how are you living? I feel like God is saying, I'll take care of what happens after you die. You take care of what you're doing before then.
How do you suggest, I mean, when you talk about love and you talk about, I mean, the kind of, you know, wonderful things you're talking about, how does somebody engage in the beginning of that roadmap?
Forgiveness. I believe that we live in a universe which is abundant. And when we love and when we make basic human decency and ethics, you know, we don't ask ourselves enough in America today what it means to be a good person. Not just what it means to be a rich nation or a powerful nation, but what it means to be a good nation. Not just what it means to be a rich person or a successful person, what it means to be a good person. I think we need to get back to those questions. And when we do that, everything begins to line up in a different way. And we realize sometimes, am I critical? Am I negative? Do I blame people more than bless people? Am I compassionate? Am I merciful? And sometimes we look at ourselves and we go, no, I play victim all the time. I complain all the time. I blame other people all the time. I'm negative all the time. And you go, whoa. And that's the beginning of the spiritual path, is to clean up our own hearts.
Where did that path begin for you?
Pardon?
How did that path begin for you?
How does that path begin?
How did it begin for you, historically?
Well, I always had a deep thing about God, even when I was a little girl. But when I was in my 20s, I started reading a set of books called A Course in Miracles. And The Course in Miracles doesn't have a monopoly on truth. It's not a religion. There's no dogma. There's no doctrine. But it's a psychological course that is based on the universal spiritual themes of love and forgiveness and atonement for our own mistakes, that is at the core of all the great religious teachings. And it made a tremendous difference in my life, and still does make a difference when I apply it. You know, I always say, when I practice what I preach, my life really works well. You know, it's not enough just to know these things, we have to practice these things. It's easy enough to be loving to someone who is loving to me. It's easy enough to be loving in a situation where other people are behaving the way I want them to.
Right.
The issue in life is, what about when you're triggered? What about when you're tempted? Are you going to constrict your heart? Are you going to open your heart? And everybody is moving so fast today. Everybody lacks impulse control because everything's moving too fast.
Right.
You know, for that matter, before there was texting, I might have a negative thought or a critical thought, but I didn't have such a way to let you know I have it right now.
Right.
So I think that prayer and meditation and a deeper mindfulness and reflection, everybody realizes just everything's spun out of control in the society. And for too many of us, it's like my life is spun out of control. So I think that people are cultivating a much deeper place of love, mindfulness, whatever you call it, and from that there is personal repair, and ultimately there will be societal repair. I believe that.
So at some level you have to kind of just slow down and take a look at yourself, whether it be through meditation and even feeling good physically, I would think, and eating well, right? I mean, isn't it all part of it?
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to feel good to behave well sometimes?
If you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do, you turn on your phone, you turn on your computer, you turn on the television, you look at the newspaper, you are just downloading into your mind the stress and the anxiety of the world. And then people are like mystified why they're depressed by noon. And then, of course, we have that whole issue of how Big Pharma has certainly taken advantage of that, turned that suffering into a profit center. What we want to realize is that even 5 minutes spent in a deep sense of quiet, in a deep, whatever your tradition is, whether it's religious or whether it's spiritual, whether it's secular, just, and this, because otherwise the stress and the anxiety, it assaults your mind, and as you were saying, it assaults your body. In both Judaism and Christianity, of course, that's the meaning of the Sabbath. There's something very powerful about just taking one day and just saying, I'm getting off the wheel of the craziness. It is diminishing our capacity as human beings to be so frenetic as we are if we allow ourselves to constantly be at the effect of the assault of technology. And today with our political situation, everybody's feeling it on any given day. What's he going to do? What did he tweet this morning? Oh my God. So, you know, this is not the way to live. But the answer can't be that you turn away from that. The issue is that you pray and meditate first, then you read the paper, then you know what's going on, and then you can be actually a conduit of transformation rather than just being at the effect of the craziness.
This sense of frantic politics that you're referring to, is it different today than it was
come on.
past? Yeah.
You and I remember, when you pick up the newspaper, and there is an article about how the government is even discussing the possibility of a nuclear preemptive attack in response to the belief that there might be a cyber attack on the way. You and I grew up in a time where it was at least understood that there was enough reverence for life at the center of our public dialogue that we understood no, nuclear bombs, you lob a few of those, it's all over. We had banned the bombs. There was even a conversation about nuclear nonproliferation. You hardly even hear it today. So no, we didn't live with this. You know, I grew up in the age of the Vietnam War protests. As awful as that was, we did not think that if things didn't go our way, that we were dealing with the risk of global annihilation. Today we are dealing, whether it has to do with weather catastrophes, whether it has to do with nuclear issues or anything else, with probability vectors, or at least possibility vectors, that could lead to global catastrophe in a way absolutely was not true 30 years ago.
Right. There were lines that you
there
just
were lines
knew nobody
you
was
didn't
going to cross.
cross. And that's what's happening today, those lines.
But how do you balance the weapon of love that you're promoting against some of these really horrible dictators and people who, you know, I mean, you got to be strong against some of these other world leaders. Well,
sometimes love says no. I mean, that's true in personal interaction, and it's true in global interaction. But let's look at the size of our military budget compared to the size of our State Department budget. And you know this well, having run yourself. We have a president who suggested that we have a $58 billion more in our military budget, but Secretary Tillerson actually suggested a 30% reduction in the State Department budget. Even Congress, the Republican Congress, said, no, we're not giving you that reduction. What do you think that 30% was going to come from? It was going to come from peace-building, diplomatic efforts. You can't just fight disease, you have to cultivate health. You can't not cultivate justice, not cultivate peace, not cultivate brotherhood, not cultivate democracy, not cultivate the amelioration of human suffering, not give women greater economic opportunity, not give children greater educational opportunity, and then just deal with the conflict and the violence that is almost inevitable when you do not take care of those things, and then just hand it to the military and say, you guys handle it. That's like not taking care of your body, not taking care of your health, getting sick, and thinking that the surgeon or the medical doctor can always just eradicate or suppress symptoms. It doesn't work that way.
Do you think now, with more women being elected to public office, is that hopeful to you that things may change?
Yes, it's hopeful, but we have only just begun, and we have got to I just think that American women are going to rock it this year. Look at all the women who are running for office. Yes, it's beginning to change, but I think that more and more people are recognizing the urgency of this moment. Incremental change is not an option. We need to be courageous enough to articulate and to effectuate some fundamental shifts in the way we interact with each other as people, as individuals, between and among peoples on the planet, and how we interact with the earth itself.
When you look at elections like the one we had in Alabama, and you look at the potential for a candidate to really be wire to wire until the end of the race. I mean, it was a really close election, and somebody who had been accused of
Pedophilia.
Acting inappropriately with young women, banned from
Criminally
the school,
with young women.
banned from
with children is total
children,
crime
yeah.
at that point. Yeah.
Yes, banned from the mall. I mean, it really is. It was almost fascinating to see that he had gotten so far with that kind of background.
You know, I was visiting Israel last year, and I went to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum of Israel, and they have a lot of the videotapes of Hitler. And one of the things you realize, of course, in your historical, if you take a historical view, is everything he did, he said he was going to do, and he was saying it for a long time. And one of the things that Hitler later said was the only way they could have stopped us if they had stopped us fiercely, swiftly, and early. And when you look at the forces that are promulgating some of these profoundly anti-democratic candidates, profoundly anti-democratic policies, I think that millions of Americans are waking up to the fact that there is something fiercely wrong going on there. And I like to think that all people of goodwill, you know, whether you're Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, these are not even left-right issues. So I think we need to think less in terms of those who don't agree with us and more in terms of harnessing the kinds of values that will enable us to cut that stuff off at its knees in the midterm elections in 2018. Not only who's winning the primaries, who's running, and definitely Election Day. We always had homophobes, we always had anti-Semites, we always had racists, we always had bigots, we always had those in America, obviously. But you and I grew up in a time where we sort of thought we had reached a national consensus, lines past which we did not go. And that's what's happened now. And we need to pull that back into a radical center of decency and dignity and goodwill. That's what I think people want. That's what I think people are yearning for. And if we work for it, that's what we will see expressed in November of 2018 and beyond.
Thank you so much, Marianne Williamson.
Thank you.
And of course, your number one thing is you want to encourage people to vote.
Absolutely.
Right? Because none of this happens without voting.
I couldn't agree more.
All right. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are many types of careless drivers. Those who text and drive, drink and drive, and those distracted drivers. If you've been hurt, you need to call me.
Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.